Welcome to the Windows Computer and Technology channel, and we're going to talk a little bit about Tiny 10, Tiny 11, which are two stripped-down versions of Windows 10 and 11 that exists out there. And one of the things that I get asked very often, and actually a few things we'll address here. First of all, I get a lot of requests of people saying, should Tiny 10 or Tiny 11 be my main Windows drive, and should I use that as, my main Windows operating system, and where do I download it? Remember that Tiny 10, Tiny 11 are more of experimental than real operating systems. It's Windows, but it's stripped down to the bare minimum, which means there's a lot of what you need that is not in there. When you strip down the operating system to its bare bones, what happens is that all the modules that might be useful for you for certain things that you do have been removed. So you will encounter, and actually I've had quite a few people last time I talked about Tiny 11 that tried to install it and came to the conclusion they had a lot of blue screens. It wasn't working right. They couldn't install it after a certain past a certain install phase. It crashed and all sorts of things. And that's the thing about Tiny 11. And the way that it's created is that it might crash on some system depending on your drivers, the system drivers, and so on. If it works, it works. But if it doesn't work, don't ask for any help. There's no help to have about Tiny 10 or 11. Tiny 10 works apparently on systems that are like computers that are really old and very, very low on resources, which is kind of interesting. It'd be nice if Microsoft would release such versions on its own with the install and the fact that it would work on most PCs. But that's not going to happen. A lot of questions concerning both Tiny, but also Windows itself. Would Tiny 10, Tiny 11, could that work on a smartphone or an Android tablet or things like that? And here's the thing. Windows is not made to work on smartphones or on tablets. Let's say one thing. On Android tablets or ARM tablets, as we're going to call them, because that's the processor in there. You've noticed that, we call Windows when we look at different things. And an example here is that when you go to the File Explorer, if you go to the File Explorer and look at your program files, you have x86. And sometimes it's x64 that shows up in different folders. Why is that? Well, that is the definition that you're going to be on a architecture that is based on Intel x86 or x64, and AMD chips like the AMD Ryzen chips are actually compatible x86 x64 processors. That's why it also works there. Now the smartphones and the Android tablets have ARM processors for the most part, and what happens is that is a different thing. These processors cannot run Windows natively. Now, that said, there is a version of Windows that's on ARM that technically could be adapted to an Android tablet or an Android phone, but it's not really meant for that, and Microsoft doesn't seem to work much into whatever they're doing with it. It's kind of a lost cause right now. But that technically, if tweaked, could, and there are some geeks out there that from time to time show how they ran an ARM version of Windows on a smartphone and things like that, but don't expect that to be something you can do on your own, and it's a lost cause pretty much. As for the tiny versions, Tiny 10, Tiny 11, even though they are small, even though they are very compact, don't take a lot of resource, they are still x86 or x64 based, which means they still require an Intel or AMD processor to run. That said, yes, technically if you create a virtual environment on an ARM machine, you could run a standard version of Windows. That's actually what's happening on some Mac computers with M1 chips or M2 chips. What happens is they have a virtualized environment that emulates, and standard Windows can actually run in a emulation of an x86, x64 environment. So these are the questions that I have, and even though the idea of Tiny 10, Tiny 11 is super interesting, I totally understand that, and especially if you have older machines, it's not a thing that's very useful in general on everyday today work machines or machines that you need to use all the time. You will be running into a wall at some point with all sorts of things that you want to do. If you enjoy my videos, please subscribe, give us thumbs up. Thank you for watching.